Welcome to another edition of Women's Wrestling Weekly, the show, episode number 21. I am Kyle Klingman, joined by Scott Beck. Scott, we'll get to mailbag, but first, a topic we need to dive into first. As we've talked about the growth of women's wrestling, we've just seen a lot of good things happening. And one of the things you brought up in a previous show is just the proliferation of women coaching, whether it's at the college level or the high school level. And just looking at the numbers in the top 10 for the NCAA and NAIA, it was the first time that the NAIA and NCAA were coached by women. So that's a historic feat that we didn't bring up. Ashley Flavin for Life University and Clarissa Chun for the University of Iowa. Just looking at the top 10, Life University, coached by Ashley Flavin. Number 3, Cumberland's by Sarah Allen. Number 7, Southern Oregon, Joy Lewandowski. She's the interim coach right now. On the NCAA side, there were 3, Clarissa Chun at Iowa, Gracie Figueroa, interim for King University. They placed 5th, and Paulina Biega in 9th place for Sacred Heart. I think that's a good trend, but I'd still like to be able to see that number go up. We've talked about it at the high school level. I think for me, with Bigsby hiring Jenna Burkett as a world bronze medalist, that just put them into the stratosphere, and we need more of that in those high-level coaching. Lindsay Spute, who wrestled at McKendree, she's at College Park in Texas. Deanna Betterman was a multi-time world team member. She has coached high school. I think she may have left, but I think the trend in doing that is good. So your thoughts on that trend of getting more women involved?
Yeah, I mean, it's happening and it's just going to keep happening. It may not happen at exactly the pace that we'd like to see, but I think there will be little jumps. I think, where we'll see little improvements, and all of a sudden, maybe a year or two later, there'll just be a lot more spots. I think, yeah, the top 10, what the right number should be, I don't know, but, I'd like to see 6 to 8 at least, those teams ultimately coached by women. And I think as the sport keeps growing and people keep moving on, we're going to see a lot more of that moving forward. Randy Miller coaches down in Texas, Olympic medalist. We're just gonna, see more of that happening.
But we're still in the infancy stage. It's still got to be kind of a slow cooker approach that you can't just rush it in and say, we want men or women to coach just because they happen to be in wrestling. There is a formula to being good at coaching, and it's not overnight. I go back to something Jamie Pendergast, who is the athletic director at Life University, she said she wants more women in coaching, but you kind of have to play the long game because you're not going to be paid well for maybe the first 5 years. You might be on some sort of a stipend, and it's investing in your future and how you're going to get to that next level of coaching, which would be the head coaching role. It doesn't pay great a lot of times, but it is a path. If you're going to take it, you have to follow the formula. You have to be patient because the end game could be head coaching, but it takes a while.
Yeah, and as we said, in general, other than the ultra top levels of the men's world, women, wrestling coaching does not pay particularly well in general. And also, let's not get out of control and do a disservice to the men that have kind of been coaching the women or been doing this for a while. They've done a good job. We'd like to see more women, but that doesn't mean that it's exclusively should be women, or that the men aren't or can't do a good job. I just think it's good, for the younger ladies to have female role models, but that doesn't mean they can't have good men role models. I don't think we just try to move too quickly either. A lot of the men are very good coaches, both men and women. There are women that coach men. And remember Tanya Verbeek was the men's national coach as well as the women's in Canada.
There's an open lane right now that is being neglected, and that's women in the wrestling journalism, wrestling media field. I don't know that there's any at this point. Shannon Scoville is the closest thing I can think of to a full-time media member. She works with NCAA.com. She's not full-time. She teaches college classes, but that's the closest thing I can think of. And I think of Reese Larramendy and others, but Reese Larramendy has expressed a desire to want to get into commentating, being a figurehead in women's wrestling. How do we keep Reese Larramendy, who's a national champion, two-time All-American for the University of Iowa, who has a desire to be in this lane? How do we make sure that when she is done with wrestling, she has a voice and that she's commentating and doing quality work in wrestling? I don't know the answer to that because it's an open lane right now. Not many jobs available. Other women have expressed that to me that they have interest, but I think of Reese Larramendy in particular. How do we keep her involved long term?
I don't really have the answer. You're the journalist, Kyle. But I mean, I think it's incumbent upon her people throwing their names in the hats and people like yourself, mentoring them and trying to help them get roles. I know that there were a few women that Emma Bruntiel had done some things. There was Reaper Wrestling. There were a couple of websites. It's very hard, to do this on your own, to just create a website or forum. I think it's going to have to be, in conjunction with the wrestling media, whether it's FloWrestling or the Mat.com or you know Intermat, and I think maybe the community is going to have to ultimately, and then maybe the coaches or the athletes are going to demand coverage, by female reporters, and not give the time of day as much perhaps to men until they show some effort, to bring. I mean, it's a catch-22 because you can't be too choosy if we don't have massive coverage as is. We're trying to grow it and start making demands on who's covering, the community. But I think it would be a good step, and I think the community's going to have to, push for that. And just like everything else, I'm sure it will be a battle.
I'm glad you mentioned the Mad.com. They do have two females that work in communications part with Gary Abbott, and Gary Abbott has been on the forefront of covering women's wrestling from day one. So he understands this and understands the need to get more women involved in this area. But I would love to see Reese Larramendy on a call, whether it's a world championship call. And it's not just because you are a wrestler or no wrestling means that you're necessarily going to be good at commentary. And I think there's a misconception that just because you wrestled means you know how to articulate action and articulate a call. It's not the case. There has to be some development. There has to be some standards in how you get there. You just don't throw someone on a mic just because they happen to wrestle and think they're going to be good. I think Reese Larramendy will be exceptional, but there is a process to get to that point. And I would just love to lower that barrier for entry, let her get an opportunity and continue to grow in that area if she's shown some interest. I know Devin Gomez at Life University, she's creating her own lane and she wants to get involved in just anything that's sports media. Maybe it's not just wrestling, but we need to give women more of those opportunities in those high profile roles so that they can see it's a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, it's incumbent upon the community to help, and it's they need to be persistent as well, throw their name in the hat, and hopefully we can keep raising awareness, and we'll have some opportunities.
And because someone just told me this weekend at the NCAA championships in Philadelphia for the men that when the women had their championship in Coralville, Iowa, there was a neat thing that they did where high school state champions in the state of Iowa held the weight when they came out for the Parade of Champions. And she was so excited when Kylie Welker came out that Kylie Welker actually brushed against her and touched her. I mean, that's the level that's exciting that
Yeah.
they're seen as that and that they're like superheroes to a lot of these high school girls. So the more that we can get those women that they identify with getting into a different role and getting into a different space, I think the better we're going to advance as women's wrestling.
Yeah, and I think they had, I believe at Coralville, they had some of the high school people doing some of the commentary on the mics as well. Were called on, I believe. No, it wasn't. Yeah, it was at the Nationals. Yeah,
They did. Yeah, and I
yeah,
think
yeah,
Pennsylvania State Championships might have, and that's a great start. That's a great way to get them more involved and get them into that lane. It's good.
yeah. And they did a good job. Some of the commentators were really good, and it's not easy. You think it's easy to try it. It's pretty difficult, and it definitely takes talent.
But yeah, and it's commentary. It's if Reese Larramendy wants to do it, it's her asking the questions and being in front of the audience. And it's a little difficult right now because she's still in her competition phase. So
Of
getting her
course.
involved when you have a bias and you're with a program, it's difficult in getting into that lane. But once she gets done with college or once she gets done with international wrestling, however far she wants to take it, it'd be great to see her get involved and step into some of those roles.
Yes, if that's what she wants to do, go for it. We need it.
Let's go to mailbag. The NCAA, not NWCA, the National Coaches Wrestling Association, which doesn't want to be called club. And we got a little bit of a clarification from someone who listened to the last show and brought up her rationale for wanting to continue on with the NCAA is that not everyone wants to be Olympic gold medalists. And that was one of the topics and the points that she brought up that this is a lane that you can just come and go as you please. It's kind of like road racing. If you want to run a 5K on the weekend, you can. If you want to compete in the NCAA and be part of this, you can. I think for that reason, this is a good opportunity for women to, and men, to get involved in a situation in a lane that is wide open right now, Scott.
Yeah, and I appreciate the comments and the feedback. And it was also like saying that the reason that the wrestling folk style is because that's all many of these athletes have ever done. They might have wrestled a little bit in high school. They never really wrestled the international style, never really aspired to, and this is what they know, and they just want to kind of jump on the mat and compete. I would argue, it's shame that you didn't actually wrestle freestyle, because if you like folk style just playing around, I think it's a lot easier, especially as you're recreationally doing the sport to wrestle freestyle. It's just kind of easier on the body. But it was a good point, well taken, and I think it's important to recognize that yes, some of the teams, she explained that some of the institutions have both a club and a team, and others just have a club. And there may or may not be aspirations to go to the next level. It just may be a bunch of men or women that want to wrestle recreationally and still, do the sport. So it was a really good point. Opened my eyes up to it because I don't really think about it that way that much. Like, I don't always perceive wrestling to be like recreational. It's just such a hard sport. I don't think about it that way. But I guess, in college, to just get on the mat and have some fun, I think it makes sense. And it was good to see that perspective. It makes sense to me.
Because there is I don't want to say a high barrier for entry, but it's
Hmm.
as you said, it's a tough sport. And so to get involved, and it's intimidating when you go out there by yourself on the mat. And so maybe not a lot of people want to put the investment into all of the training and all of the development that goes into reaching that highest level. And to have an opportunity like that, it's not going to get the most coverage, and it may not get any coverage, but that's not what you're there for. You're there for recreation, and you want to be part of something that's bigger than yourself. And I think we need to celebrate that division more than we do.
Yeah, absolutely. My eyes have been open to it. It was good to see the perspective, and look, watching that tournament, they did a hell of a good job. So kudos to them.
We need to learn more about when they have their competition too, where they go if they enter tournaments. So I want to learn more about how they get competition outside of the national championship. So we'll continue to learn on that. As we talked about the folk style freestyle debate, it's a little bit more nuanced and a little more deep than I thought. I was always under the impression that people want freestyle and that it's going that direction. And it may not be the case. I think some high school coaches want folk style. And someone even at the NCAA championships in Philadelphia had suggested that college women's wrestling should be folk style. And Gary Abbott stepped in and said, no, that the original concept of having women's college wrestling was to have this be an Olympic movement. That's why we had freestyle, and you don't mess with that. And it was a good, hearty conversation, but it opened my eyes to realizing that we still are entrenched in that folk style mentality from the high school system, and making that transition into college is a ways away, because there are a lot of girls that don't wrestle freestyle going into college. So I think as we look at that gap, it's a lot bigger than I thought it originally was.
Yeah, and I think and it's segueing on that, from some comments I got from Emma Randall, where we were talking about that hybrid team where you had the men and the women, and she mentioned to me that they're not doing that anymore. So I think really, which is a shame because she said they really liked it, and the boys and girls liked it, but I don't, New York City stopped that hybrid team. But I think what the key point is that the landscape is just so varied everywhere, whether it's girls are wrestling on the boys team, girls have their own girls team, whether it's a freestyle girls team, whether it's a folk style girls team. And I think it just varies. And I think some of that is stepped in resources. Perhaps you may have a location where you have a boys high school team and the coach has been there for a long time, really was never involved in freestyle. So this is what they do, just folk style. Others, it could be regional. I just think it's so varied. So ultimately, it's going to get direction, but the direction needs to, I think, be set by the goal. And the goal, I like what Gary Evans said. The goal is the Olympic movement for us to, keep getting better as a country. Ultimately, before I die, maybe beat Japan. and I got to smile at it, Kyle. I like that.
Yeah.
But just, to keep improving. And I think ultimately to do that, it has to be, where we were, everybody's on the same page, and college is all freestyle. And ultimately the high school, to the extent possible, more and more programs in states that are doing it are emphasizing freestyle, because the fact of the matter is, wrestling is a martial art, and it's a sport too, but it is a sport that is a martial art and a combat sport, and there's a lot of subtlety and beauty, and it takes a long time to really keep getting better and better. And the sports do have subtle differences, freestyle and folk style, although there's many similarities and they complement each other. But the sooner, I believe, athletes start with freestyle, the better they will develop in that sport and learn the little nuances and subtleties and get better.
Quick digression. We did beat Japan in 1999 and 2003 World Cup. So I don't know if that counts for you, Scott, but that did happen. It's been a while. So that's the only two
Yeah, we
times.
can. Well, God willing, we'll do it before I die. We can do it, but it's consistency. I mean, When I say that, I don't mean like a one-off, beat Japan. I mean, we are the best team in the world. That is the goal, to consistently be number one, number two, but winning, in a 5 or 10 year horizon of a reasonable percentage of the time. So to be the dominant team in the world, the bar is high. They're very good, but we're very good. And I think it's a goal that can be done.
But again, when we're talking about this, it just shows the complexities of where women's wrestling is. So the first college national championship was 2004, which happened to coincide with the first time the Olympics were included women's freestyle wrestling. First world championships were in 1988. So we're still in a pretty new sport here, and it's developing it kind of this odd, clunky way where you have a different style in high school and then it goes to a different style in college. And then, of course, the internationals freestyle. And you have all of this thought, and I don't want to say controversy about what style you should have, but are the coaches prepared to coach freestyle? Some have different views. You have a women's product where the NAI split off. You have NCAA programs. You only have one Power Four. You have a handful of Division Ones, and then they're all mixed. And what's this going to go? And I think another thing too, Scott, and this got brought up in Philadelphia, is there's a little bit of, I don't want to say sadness, but all these women and men that laid the groundwork, Gary Abbott, Joan Fulp, and a lot of these women that developed the sport from the grassroots, now you just have to pass it off to the NCAA and now they take over. So I hope Jackie Paquette at the NWCA, I hope she has a voice in that because she's really been a leader for the advancement of women's wrestling and has the knowledge of where the sport came from. But to pass it off, and that was the goal, was to pass it off. But it's tough to do, to let go of that a little bit and say, now the NCAA, this is yours.
I don't necessarily think it's great as an organization. However, that was the goal, for the sense of recognition, scholarship opportunities, money. It's tricky, and I also think the names that you mentioned, who are the pioneers, and all these coaches of these universities uh, that started, as the WCWA, the NAI. I mean, they were the pioneers, and I think it's incumbent upon the wrestling community, and I think the way this is going to shape out, the voices will be heard. I don't think this is just going to immediately move into a NCAA dominating the sport of wrestling, and shame on us if we let that happen. I mean, I know it's kind of funny though; it's a perverse irony. Like, really, this is what you want? You want them to make the decisions, but I think to get on the level, especially as we grow, for young student athlete women to be interested in the sport with the goal of attending, universities and scholarships, I think that ultimately is necessary, though.
And I'm missing a lot of people. I just mentioned Gary Abbott and Joan Fulp, but there's Andrea Yamamoto, there's Trish Saunders, there's Afsoon Johnston, there's Shannon Williams. I mean, just the list goes on. So I hate to even bring up names because I'm going to miss a ton. But
Is this going to piss some people off,
well,
Kyle?
I know And
So
so
you're
that's,
apologizing ahead of
yeah, I'm
time. That's good.
apologizing ahead because I know there was just
Better you than me.
yeah, a ton of people that got involved. And so if someone wants to get mad and say, no, this person needs to be named, I will name that person. But the point being is that they did an incredible
Sally
job.
Roberts, we
Sally
can't forget.
Roberts at
I
Wrestle Like a
mean,
Girl. Yeah, there's just tons and tons that did that laid the
Jackie
groundwork.
Davis, Emma Randall. I mean, there's just,
Yeah,
endless.
it goes on and on. So but they laid the groundwork and then it's passing it off. So I hope there's still some opportunity to get involved and that their voices can be heard in this because they did a great job of getting them to the finish line and now you pass the baton in a big way.
Yes, and well, yeah, I still think it's going to be a slow process, but yeah, I mean, they were the pioneers, and they're going to have a voice. I don't see this just transitioning completely to where it's NCAA or nothing, and I also think just the nature of the way you have the USA Wrestling's involvement in the state and national tournaments and qualifying things is going to have a big voice, and USA Wrestling has done a good job. And I will say, not to belabor the Gary Abbott one, but he has really done a very good job in supporting and always writing about the women's wrestling events, and for USA Wrestling.
He was the original. He's the one that got it started. Sometime he was the lone voice a lot of years.
Long Islander like me.
Yeah, pretty
Yep.
cool. So Gary does a great job and
Yeah.
it's his work is so appreciated for women's
And,
wrestling.
yeah, and I just want to add one final thought. We have just an anecdote about freestyle versus folk style. So, in the men's tournament, one of the interviews, Bo Bartlett from Penn State, who's a four-time All-American, of NCAA finalist. They're interviewing him. He gave a very thoughtful interview at the end. And he's like, they said, "What are your plans?" And Bo's like, you know, I'm glad I'm done with folk style. I'll do beach wrestling, I'll do freestyle, I'll do Greco. It just beats your body up. It takes a lot out of you. And I think the people that don't understand the differences or haven't wrestled freestyle, folk style is a grind. It's just hard on your body. I would argue it's not as much fun. So I just think the people that are against it may not understand or done it. But I think that with Bo Bartlett summarizing it was like it becomes like more work, and wrestling should be fun. And I just think there's more fun in freestyle wrestling.
Terry Steiner has gone on the record as saying he wants the entire country, men's and women's, to go to freestyle. And that surprised me coming from Terry because he was so good in the top game and with those tilts. And I felt like his style was more incumbent of folk style wrestling than freestyle. So I was surprised to hear him say that. But now that he's in that developmental phase for women's freestyle wrestling, it makes sense that he would think that we should all be on the same page and all be in the same style.
Yeah, that would be great. There's also he went through 4 or 5 years of wrestling folk style in the Iowa wrestling room, which kind of beats your body up a little bit. I mean, don't get me wrong, freestyle is hard on your body too, but folk style just takes a lot more out of you. It really does. The practices, the grind, and in general. The other thing I would add, just observing and looking at some of the records of the women's national tournaments of the athletes, I think we're wrestling too many matches. I see these records of some athletes, 45 and 2, 40, 50 matches. I think that's too much, in my opinion. I know we want to get experience, you want to get mat time. When you travel, you want to get matches in, but it's a lot, in a lot of ways too. I think, we got to come to a right number, but I don't think the right number is 40 to 50 matches at the college level.
To your point, Scott, Cam Guerin made a post recently, and I'm glad we were able to bring this up. She talked about having 3 procedures in the past 6 months, and she actually shared her journey on an Instagram post. I think it is such a tough sport, and she was in folk style and freestyle, but just that she was willing to share her story about how much it takes, and just staying healthy in wrestling is kind of like winning an Olympic gold medal a little bit because it's hard to do to get to the finish line and feel healthy and not be beat up. She has one more possible year of eligibility. She's a 4-time national college champion for McKendree, but I like that Cam Guerin was talking about this as a topic and that health in wrestling is something that should be valued and should be thought about.
It's really, I mean, one could argue it's the same as in life. We take our health for granted, and until an athlete's injured, or and and over time, everybody pretty much has, even if you don't have a quote major injury, you have nagging injuries. The sport just does that to you. So, it was really cool, what Cam posted, and really interesting. And you see what it takes and how hard it is. This is a person who is exceptionally successful, placed in the Olympic trials to, four national titles. And the sport takes a lot out of you. She's beat up, and now she's looking forward to a reset to get healthy and then go back to competing. And hopefully everything's healed up. And nothing's ever perfect, but it's just a part of the game. And I think as you get older and you've done this, you guys said wear and tear. It's also in awareness and understanding of what you're capable of and whatnot, and how to adjust your training, not just in terms of periodization and peaking, but also how often you can go hard, when to stop, and how to push yourself in a safe way.
Well worth it to go and take a look at that post. As we close the door on this conversation about the NCAA, I am so excited to see when they make the announcement of what the format's going to look like, how many qualifiers are going to be for each team, what the regional format is going to look like. I think that's the next step for us to really understand what the direction of women's college wrestling at the NCAA level will be, because until we have that data, I think it is a wait and see. And you brought that up a couple shows ago that we can't really predict what this is going to look like until we know what it's going to look like and we have some verifiable information about where the NCAA is thinking about directionally.
Yeah, I mean, we could guess all we want, but we really don't know. We've gotten some feedback, and people think they have an inkling of what it will probably look like. But we'll just have to see, and then we'll discuss it. And I'm hoping that whatever choices are made with the eye, the plan that this is how we're starting, but we're willing to bob and weave and adapt as needed based on what works and what doesn't work. I think the worst thing you can do is you start something with a very parochial view. This is the way it's going to be, and we're not going to change it. I think as long as you have an open mind and kind of say, it's not experimental. This is an NCAA sport, but we are willing to tweak the format. And I think, to be honest with you, I credit like the National Wrestling Coaches Association with the rules, for men's wrestling, that rules are changed and adjusted, and things have been tried, 3-point takedown, the extra near fall points. I mean, for men, you need some type of pushover rule, I think, but they're willing to try things, and that's good. And I think whoever the committee is, I hope that when they're enacting the new rules, that they're doing this with an air of flexibility over time.
One final thing that has not been mentioned as we look toward next season, Menlo, I don't know if it's going to happen next season or the following, but they are moving from NAIA to NCAA. They have been a championship program in the NAIA level and WCWA when they had that, so they've won titles in both. And I know they would love to win an NCAA championship, so they will be in the mix. So another team that we get to think about moving in the mix with the North Centrals, McKendree, Grand Valley State. I don't know if King's going to be there anymore, the University of Iowa. So Menlo College is going to be a factor, I think, because I think they can get a lot of that California talent into the room.
Yeah, I mean, the original Beat the Streets girls coach Jackie Davis wrestled at Menlo, and she wrestled there with a UFC fighter Carla Esparza. They had a pretty tough team, and then you had the recent teams where you had Gracie Figueroa, Leda Martinez, both four-time California state champs, and great international age group world medalists, multiple national titles from both age group world teams. So they've had a great history, recently with Nene Estrella in that team that won. So they're going to just, I think, it's a very fertile ground, in California for them to pick up athletes, and they're going to be a contender rather quickly. It's got a great history, and that's exciting to see. And I'm glad to hear that. I would worry about them. They're going to be significant very quickly.
I'm glad you mentioned names. Now I could get to pick you apart. Precious Bell also was there, final Xer. So yeah, we gotta.
Precious, I'm sorry. Thanks,
That,
All
but
right.
hey, it's hard when you're trying to list off names.
Yeah.
It's hard
Yes,
when you're,
exactly.
but I think I do think they're going to be a factor, and I think that is something that needs to be brought up because that is exciting that we get one more team that can be competitive. So if you get Lehigh, which I hope, I don't know what they're thinking right now. If you got Lehigh, if you got Tarleton State, You have Delaware State coming into the fold as a Division I program. It's starting to get fun right now when can get these programs added in the mix. And now we have a new rule set with the NCAA taking over and the possibility of one per school, one per weight. I think we're in new territory right now, and it's exciting.
Yeah, what I love, to be honest with you, is if I were in the Midwest, Tarleton State in Texas, then you have Lehigh, in the east, Menlo on the west. So I think if you could get one like big main team, per region at least to start, and then build around that, it's a really good thing because some athletes don't want to go across the whole country. They want to be relatively near home, and all these states, Pennsylvania with Lehigh, you know, or for some of the athletes that want to go to an Ivy League school, you have Columbia, which hopefully will be happening, and other Ivies will follow. But it's good to have these pockets, locally where they can be the aspiring, local, but where all the young high school athletes, junior high school athletes, go to those matches when they're younger and say, hey, that's where I want to go when I get old. That's going to be where, God willing, I'll win my state titles, and that'll be where my goal is to go. And then we can build around that. So I think it's really good.
Scott, I'm begging Oklahoma State to start a women's program. Please, will you do it? That would be the program to get it started. Then you'd have that historically rich program, Oklahoma State. I want them to do it.
Well, I'm begging as well. So we're both on the same page there. I just think that would be absolutely phenomenal. And, what they're, now on the men's team, the new blood and David Taylor and the regime, it would be great. I don't know where they are in planning or not, but I'm begging as well.